You think you know a man because he controls half the city. Gabriel Costa built an empire on ruthlessness, keeping his ledgers clean and his hands incredibly dirty. But absolute power creates blind spots. He thought he knew everything happening under his own roof. Until a freezing Tuesday at 2 in the morning, when he walked into his desolate underground garage and found the one woman who kept his chaotic life in order, curled up in the back of a beat-up sedan. The underground parking garage beneath Costa Enterprises smelled of damp, concrete old motor oil and the faint metallic tang of city rain. It was 2:14 a.m. Gabriel Costa walked out of the private elevator, the heavy steel doors sliding shut behind him with a dull thud. His footsteps echoed in the cavernous, empty space. He had dismissed his security detail 3 hours ago, when you spent your days managing the volatile tempers of harbor smugglers and union bosses. Solitude was a rare commodity. He liked the quiet. He liked the cold. He unbuttoned his charcoal overcoat, reaching into his pocket for the keys to his armored SUV. The lights overhead buzzed a sickly, yellow fluorescent hum that flickered off the hoods of the few cars left in the executive lot. That was when he saw it. Parked 3 spots down from his Rover was a 2008 Honda Civic. The paint was peeling off the rear bumper. Rust ate at the edges of the wheel wells. It was an ugly utilitarian thing that aggressively did not belong in a garage reserved for men who wore $10,000 watches. Gabriel stopped. His hand instinctively drifted to the leather holster resting against his ribs beneath his suit jacket. In his world, anomalies were threats. A car that shouldn't be there was a potential car bomb. A shadow that lingered too long was a hitman. He moved silently, closing the distance between himself and the Honda. The first thing he noticed was the windows. They were entirely fogged over from the inside. Condensation beaded on the glass, trailing down in thin, watery streaks. Someone was in there. Someone breathing. Gabriel stepped to the driver's side window. He didn't draw his weapon, but his thumb rested on the safety. He wiped a hand across the wet glass, clearing a 6-inch circle of visibility. He looked inside. His grip on the gun loosened. His brow furrowed. Curled in the back seat, buried under a faded wool trench coat and a cheap plaid blanket, was Nora Hayes, his secretary. Gabriel stared. For a long 10 seconds he just stared. Nora was a fixture in his life. She was the immovable object against which the chaotic force of his criminal syndicate broke. She managed his schedule, filtered out the sycophants, and served him espresso with a level of detached professionalism that he found immensely reassuring. She was 30, fiercely competent, and guarded her personal life like a state secret. Right now she was shivering. Even through the thick glass, he could see the tremors racking her small frame. She was wearing grey sweatpants and a heavy turtleneck. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, her blonde hair spilling haphazardly across a makeshift pillow fashioned from a rolled-up blazer. The temperature down here was hovering just above freezing. Gabriel rapped his knuckles against the glass. 3 sharp, authoritative knocks. Inside the car, Nora violently jolted awake. The blanket slipped. He saw the sheer, unadulterated panic in her eyes before she scrambled to sit up, her hands flailing in the dark. She looked terrified, like a cornered animal expecting a strike. When her eyes finally focused on the man standing outside her window, the terror morphed into something else. Mortification. Gabriel watched as she scrambled over the center console, practically falling into the driver's seat. She turned the key in the ignition. The engine choked, sputtered, and finally turned over with a pathetic rattle. She rolled the window down exactly 3 inches. A blast of freezing, stale air hit Gabriel's face. "Mr. Costa," she said. Her voice was raspy, thick with sleep and cold. She cleared her throat, straightening her posture as if she were sitting at her mahogany desk on the 50th floor instead of shivering in a rusted Honda. "Good morning," or "Good night." "Nora," Gabriel said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that usually sent grown men scrambling for excuses. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. "What the hell are you doing?" She didn't look him in the eye. She stared at the steering wheel, her knuckles white as she gripped the worn leather cover. "I was working late, on the Port Authority manifests. I got tired. I didn't want to risk driving home exhausted, so I thought I'd just close my eyes for a minute." It was a smooth lie, delivered with the same flat, efficient cadence she used when telling a persistent capo that Mr. Costa was unavailable. But Gabriel didn't build a criminal empire by taking people at their word. He looked at the condensation on the windows. He looked at the heavy blanket, the rolled-up blazer. This wasn't a spontaneous nap. This was a setup. "It's 38 degrees outside Nora," Gabriel said, leaning down slightly so he was at eye level with the crack in the window. "You're sleeping in a car in November." "The heater works," she said quickly. "The car was off. I turn it on periodically." She finally looked at him. Her lips were distinctly blue. Her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. "I'm fine, Mr. Costa. Really. I was just about to head home anyway." She shifted the car into drive. The transmission clunked heavily. Gabriel put a hand on the frame of the window. Not forcefully, but enough to let her know she wasn't dismissed. "Where is home, Nora?" The question hung in the freezing air. For a fleeting second, the professional mask cracked. He saw a flash of raw, desperate panic. Then it slammed shut. "Astoria," she lied, smoothly, practiced. "It's a long drive. Good night, Mr. Costa. I'll have your coffee ready by 7. She tapped the accelerator. Gabriel pulled his hand back, letting her go. He stood in the damp, empty garage and watched the taillights of the Honda fade up the concrete ramp. He didn't believe a word she said. Gabriel walked to his Rover, got in, and slammed the heavy door. The silence of the insulated cabin was deafening. He started the engine, the heater immediately blasting warm air. He sat there for a long time, staring at the empty parking spot where her car had been. In his line of work, people lied to him every day. They lied for money. They lied for power. They lied to save their own lives. He had never seen someone lie out of sheer, absolute shame. The penthouse office of Costa Enterprises was a masterclass in intimidation by design. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sprawling Manhattan skyline, offering a god's-eye view of the city Gabriel held by the throat. The floors were imported dark oak, the walls panelled in acoustic wood to ensure what was said in this room stayed in this room. At 7:30 a.m. sharp, the heavy double doors opened. Nora walked in. She was carrying a ceramic cup and saucer, perfectly balanced. She wore a crisp-tailored black pencil skirt and an ivory silk blouse. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless chignon. Not a single strand was out of place. Her makeup was immaculate, hiding the dark circles he had seen just 5 hours prior. "Double espresso," Nora said, setting the cup on the exact center of his leather blotter. "No sugar. The quarterly projections from the docs are in the red folder." Don Rossi called twice. "I told him you were in a meeting." He sounded irritated. "I suggest calling him back before noon to soothe his ego." Gabriel sat in his high-backed chair, his hands steepled in front of him. He didn't look at the files. He didn't look at the coffee. He looked at her. "Thank you, Nora." She nodded once, a crisp, efficient movement, and turned to leave. "Hold on," Gabriel said. She paused, turning back slowly. "Sir." In the harsh, unforgiving daylight of the office, Gabriel's trained eyes went to work. He was an apex predator who had survived this long by observing the microscopic details other men ignored. Now that he knew what to look for, the signs were screaming at him. The ivory silk blouse was immaculate, yes, but the collar was frayed at the edges. Barely noticeable, but there. The black skirt was tailored, but it was an older cut. And her shoes, black pumps, polished to a high shine, but the heels were worn down to the metal pins on the inside edge. She was drowning, right in front of him. "Are you feeling all right this morning?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Perfectly fine, Mr. Costa." "Why do you ask?" "You were up late." "I operate well on little sleep." She offered a polite, closed-mouth smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "Is there anything else?" "Not right now." She left the room, pulling the door shut with a soft click. For the rest of the morning, Gabriel found himself entirely unable to focus on the illicit logistics of his empire. At 10 a.m., he held a meeting with 2 captains from the Bronx regarding a missing shipment of untaxed liquor. The men were loud, aggressive, gesturing wildly. Nora sat in the corner of the room, taking shorthand notes. Gabriel watched her. He noticed the way she discreetly adjusted her posture to hide a subtle shiver despite the thermostat being set to a comfortable 72 degrees. The cold from the garage was still in her bones. At 12:30 p.m. he walked out to her desk. She was typing furiously. Next to her keyboard was a styrofoam cup of hot water and a packet of free break room crackers. "You're not going out for lunch?" Gabriel asked, leaning against the edge of her desk. Nora didn't look up from her monitor. "Heavy workload today. I'll eat at my desk." "With crackers." "I have a sensitive stomach today, sir." Another lie. Quick, effortless. Gabriel pushed off the desk and walked back into his office. He picked up his secure phone and dialed his head of security, a hulking, silent man named Elias. "Elias," Gabriel said, staring out at the grey city sky. "Pull the security footage from the executive garage. The last 3 weeks. I want to know how many nights the Honda Civic didn't leave the lot." "Boss." Elias sounded confused. He was used to tracking rival mobsters, not sedans. "Just do it. Call me when you have the number." Gabriel hung up. He paced the length of his office. He was angry, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly who he was angry with. Was it Nora for lying to him? Or was it himself for being so entirely consumed by his own power and problems that he didn't realize the woman managing his life was sleeping on concrete? 20 minutes later, the internal phone buzzed. Gabriel picked it up. 21, Elias said. Gabriel gripped the phone tight. 21 what? The Honda. It hasn't left the underground garage at night for 21 days straight. She drives it out in the morning, parks it a few blocks away, and brings it back down into the garage after 6 p.m. when the lot clears out. Boss, is there a security breach? Gabriel closed his eyes. 21 days. 3 weeks. No breach, Elias. Erase the footage. Nobody else sees it. He slammed the receiver down. He looked through the glass partition, separating his office from the antechamber. Nora was on the phone, nodding her face, composed in a mask of absolute professionalism. She was handling a multi-million-dollar supply chain dispute with a calm, even tone. She was a ghost, fading away right in his lobby. Gabriel hit the intercom button. Nora, in my office. Now. A moment later, she walked in, notepad in hand. Yes, Mr. Costa. Close the door. She hesitated. The command was sharper than his usual requests. She pushed the heavy wooden doors shut and stood in the center of the room, her pen hovering over the paper. Gabriel didn't sit. He walked around his desk, closing the physical distance between them. He stopped a few feet away, towering over her. He was a physically imposing man, broad-shouldered and sharp-jawed, with eyes the color of dark slate. He used his presence to intimidate, but right now he was just trying to break through the armor. "You weren't too tired to drive last night, Nora," Gabriel said. He didn't yell. The quietness of his voice made it worse. It made it inescapable. Nora stiffened. Her pen stopped moving. "Mr. Costa, we discussed this." "We didn't discuss anything. You lied to me. I let it go because it was 2 a.m. and you were freezing." He took a step closer. "You've been sleeping in my garage for 21 days. The color completely drained from her face. The flawless porcelain mask cracked violently. Her breath hitched a tiny involuntary sound. She looked toward the door, a sudden flight response kicking in, but Gabriel shifted, blocking her path. "I'd prefer to keep my personal life personal," she said, her voice shaking slightly. She tried to reinforce the boundary, tried to pull rank in a game where she had none. "You work for me," Gabriel said, his tone turning clinical, deliberately pushing her buttons. "Your problems are my liabilities. A secretary who lives in a car is a security risk. A desperate person is a person who can be bought by my enemies. Are you gambling drugs?" "No." The word tore out of her, sharp and offended. "Then what is it? Because if you don't tell me right now—" "Nora, you're fired. You can pack your desk." It was a bluff. He would never fire her, but he needed leverage, and he used the only leverage he had over a woman who lived for her paycheck. The threat of termination hung in the air like a guillotine. Nora stared at him. The sheer injustice of the accusation that she was a liability, a drug addict, a gambler ignited something deep within her. The exhaustion, the cold, the hunger, the 21 days of sleeping in a freezing metal box, all of it crashed into the wall of her pride. Her shoulders dropped. The rigid, perfect posture she maintained for years collapsed. Suddenly she didn't look like the untouchable gatekeeper of Costa Enterprises. She looked like a 30-year-old woman who was completely, utterly broken. She let out a harsh, bitter laugh. It was a sound devoid of any humor. "A liability." She repeated her voice, dripping with a cynical venom he had never heard from her before. She dropped the notepad on his desk. It hit the wood with a loud slap. "You think I'm selling your secrets to the Moretti family, so I can sleep in a Honda Civic." "I asked you a question," Gabriel said, his voice dropping lower. "Answer it." Nora crossed her arms tightly over her chest, as if holding her own ribs together. She looked away from him, staring out the window at the grey skyline. "My brother," she said quietly. The anger drained out of her, leaving only a hollow, echoing exhaustion. "Leo?" Gabriel remained silent, waiting. "He's 22. She continued, her eyes fixed on the skyscrapers. 3 years ago he was walking home from a shift at a diner. A drunk driver jumped the curb, pinned him against a brick wall. Gabriel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He didn't interrupt. Traumatic brain injury. Severe spinal cord damage. Nora said, her voice entirely flat, reciting a medical nightmare she had clearly memorized. "He needs round-the-clock care, a feeding tube, physical therapy to keep his muscles from completely atrophying. He can't speak. He can't walk." She finally turned to look at Gabriel. Her eyes were dry. She was long past the point of crying. Insurance covered the first year. Then they decided he had plateaued. They stopped paying for the skilled nursing facility. They said I could take him home and care for him myself. She let out another breathy, humorless laugh. "I work 60 hours a week for you, Gabriel. How exactly am I supposed to turn him every 2 hours so he doesn't get bed sores?" Gabriel stared at her. He orchestrated multi-million-dollar deals, manipulated politicians, and controlled illicit trade routes. But the math of poverty, the brutal, uncompromising arithmetic of a normal, desperate life, was something alien to him. "So you pay out of pocket," Gabriel said. It wasn't a question. "The facility costs $4,200 a month," Nora said, her chin lifting slightly. "My take-home pay here is $5,500. That leaves me $1,300 for rent, food, gas, and utilities in New York City." She took a step toward him. All the professional deference was gone. She was a woman fighting a war he couldn't comprehend. "I made it work," she said, her voice hardening. "I lived in a studio in Queens. I ate ramen. I walked to the train. I made it work for 2 years. But 3 weeks ago, my landlord sold the building. The new owners raised the rent by $800 a month. I couldn't pay it. They served an eviction notice." Gabriel felt a strange, suffocating tightness in his chest. "Why didn't you ask for an advance A raise? Why didn't you come to me?" "Because you're a mafia boss, Gabriel," she snapped, using his first name, her volume finally rising. "You aren't a charity. You don't hand out money without strings attached. If I ask you for help, I owe you. And I have seen what happens to people who owe you." The truth stung. It was a vicious, accurate assessment of exactly who he was. "So I packed my clothes into my trunk." Nora continued, her voice dropping back to a tired whisper. "I kept the gym membership so I can shower before I come to work. I sleep in the garage because it's secure and there are no cops to tap on my window and tell me to move along. Leo is safe. He's in a clean bed. He has nurses. That's all that matters." She looked at him, utterly defiant, daring him to pity her. "Do the math, Gabriel. There is no drug habit. There is no gambling debt. There is just a broken system and a sister trying to keep her brother alive. So if you want to fire me because I'm a liability, then fire me. I'll find another job. I'll park on the street." She stopped talking. The silence in the massive office was deafening. Gabriel Costa stood frozen. He was a man who commanded a small army, a man who possessed enough wealth to burn it just to stay warm. Yet facing this woman, his employee, who ironed her clothes in a public gym and starved herself so her brother could live, he was entirely, profoundly speechless. His money was soaked in blood. Hers was soaked in sacrifice. He looked at her worn shoes. He looked at the faint, purple shadows under her eyes. The urge to pull his gun and shoot the very concept of the world that did this to her was overwhelming and entirely useless. "Sit down," Gabriel finally managed to say, his voice thick. "I'd rather stand," she replied stubbornly. Gabriel reached out his large hands, gently but firmly grasping her shoulders. He felt how thin she was beneath the silk. He guided her to the plush leather chair opposite his desk and forced her to sit. He didn't walk behind his desk. He knelt in front of her, the thousands of dollars of tailoring in his suit straining against the movement. He looked up into her guarded, terrified eyes. "You're not fired," Gabriel said quietly, making a vow that extended far beyond an employment contract. "And you're never sleeping in that car again." Gabriel did not offer to help her pack the trunk of her Honda. He didn't ask if she wanted to stop for dinner. He stood up, adjusted his suit jacket, and slipped effortlessly back into the skin of the man who ran New York's underworld. "Get your coat," he ordered. Nora remained seated in the heavy leather chair. Her hands gripped the armrests. "Gabriel, I told you. I am not a charity case. I don't want your money." "I'm not giving you money," Gabriel said, walking toward the coat rack in the corner. He pulled her cheap faded wool trench coat from the hook and tossed it onto her lap. "I'm giving you an order, as your employer." She stared at the coat. "What kind of order? You possess intimate knowledge of my ledgers, my supply routes, and the names of every judge on my payroll." Gabriel stated his voice, devoid of emotion. He was speaking to her the same way he spoke to his lieutenants, cold, factual, absolute. A woman living in her car, drowning in medical debt, is a target. The Moretti family wouldn't think twice about pulling you off the street and breaking your fingers one by one until you gave them the access codes to the offshore accounts. Nora flinched. The reality of his world, the violence she usually only managed on paper, suddenly felt very close. "I wouldn't tell them anything," she said, her voice tight. "Everyone talks eventually, Nora. Pain is a very persuasive negotiator." Gabriel leaned against his mahogany desk, crossing his arms. "I cannot afford to have a compromised asset walking around my city. Therefore you are moving." "Moving where?" "Costa Enterprises maintains 3 corporate apartments in Midtown for visiting associates and foreign clients. They sit empty 9 months out of the year." He pulled a heavy silver key fob from his pocket and dropped it on the desk between them. It landed with a loud metallic clack. "You will occupy Unit 4B on West 57th. Rent, utilities and security are covered under the company's operational budget. You will sleep in a locked, secure building. If you refuse, you are a security risk, and you are fired. Do we understand each other?" It was a master stroke of manipulation. He knew she would never accept charity, so he made it a mandate. He weaponized her professionalism against her pride. Nora looked at the keys. Then she looked at him. She was smart enough to see exactly what he was doing. The fierce independence in her eyes warred with the bone-deep exhaustion dragging her down. She was so tired. Tired of the cold. Tired of the fear. Tired of waking up with an aching back, terrified a cop was going to shine a flashlight in her face. Slowly her hand reached out. Her trembling fingers closed around the silver fob. "Good," Gabriel said softly. He drove her himself. The armored SUV navigated the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan in heavy silence. Nora sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the blurred neon lights of the city. She looked incredibly small against the thick, bulletproof glass. The apartment building on 57th Street was a monolithic slab of black glass and steel. A doorman nodded respectfully as Gabriel walked her through the lobby. They rode the private elevator up to the 4th floor. Gabriel unlocked the door to Unit 4B and pushed it open. The apartment was sprawling, sterile, and impeccably furnished. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of Central Park. The floors were heated. The kitchen was stocked. It smelled like expensive cedar and clean linen. Nora stepped inside. She didn't take off her coat. She just stood in the foyer looking at the massive king-sized bed visible through the open bedroom door. It had a thick down comforter and 6 pillows. Gabriel stopped in the doorway. He didn't cross the threshold. This wasn't his sanctuary, it was hers. "The pantry is stocked. The water is hot," Gabriel said, keeping his tone carefully neutral. He could see the tension vibrating through her spine. If he pushed, she would shatter. "I will see you at the office tomorrow. Don't be late." He turned to leave. "Gabriel." He stopped. He didn't look back. "Thank you," she whispered. The armor was completely gone. Her voice was cracked raw and terrifyingly fragile. "Lock the door behind me, Nora." He pulled the heavy door shut. He stood in the quiet hallway for a long time, listening. A minute later, he heard the deadbolt slide into place. Then, faintly, through the thick wood, he heard the sound of her crying. It wasn't a delicate, cinematic weep. It was an ugly, heavy sobbing. The sound of a woman who had been holding her breath for 3 years, finally exhaling. Gabriel closed his eyes. He tightened his jaw, turned on his heel, and walked back to the elevator. He had a city to run, but suddenly the mechanics of his empire felt entirely trivial. At 7 a.m. the next morning, the heavy double doors of Gabriel's office opened. Nora walked in. She was carrying a ceramic cup and saucer. She wore a navy blue pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back in the same severe chignon. But the ghost was gone. There was color in her cheeks. The dark, bruised shadows under her eyes had lightened. She moved with a fluidity that had been absent for weeks. "Double espresso," Nora said, setting the cup on the blotter. "No sugar. The union reps from the sanitation division are pushing for a renegotiation." I put their demands in the blue folder. Gabriel watched her. He didn't touch the coffee. "Did you sleep?" Nora paused. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable for a fraction of a second, before a small, genuine smile touched the corners of her mouth. "For 9 uninterrupted hours. The mattress is very secure, Mr. Costa." "Glad to hear the company assets are functioning," he replied smoothly. "Is there anything else?" "Clear my schedule until 2 o'clock. I have an off-site meeting." "Understood." When she left, Gabriel didn't look at the union demands. He put on his coat and headed down to the garage. He didn't take his driver. He drove himself. The Oakwood Care Facility was located in a quiet, affluent suburb of Westchester. It was a sprawling campus of manicured lawns and brick buildings, smelling aggressively of bleach and lemon floor wax. It was the kind of place that charged exorbitant amounts of money to make death and tragedy look palatable to rich families. Gabriel walked into the main lobby. His tailored suit and quiet, predatory grace made the receptionist instantly sit up straighter. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice faltering slightly. "I need to speak with the facility administrator." Now, 10 minutes later, Gabriel was sitting across from a balding, nervous man named Arthur Pendleton. Pendleton's office was decorated with golf trophies and framed medical degrees. He kept adjusting his tie, clearly unsettled by the heavy, unblinking stare of the man sitting opposite him. "Mr. Costa, I don't quite understand," Pendleton said, shuffling a stack of papers. "You're inquiring about the account of Leo Hayes." "I'm not inquiring," Gabriel said softly. "I'm concluding." Concluding. Gabriel reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a sleek black checkbook. He unscrewed a gold fountain pen. "Leo Hayes requires 24-hour skilled nursing physical therapy and a feeding tube. The cost is $4,200 a month. I am writing a check to cover his care for the next 10 years. In full." Pendleton's jaw dropped. He scrambled for a calculator on his desk. "So 10 years, that's over $500,000. We don't usually accept lump sums of that magnitude without—" "You accept it today?" Gabriel interrupted his voice, dropping an octave. "You will apply it directly to the Hayes account, and you will upgrade his room to a private suite with a window overlooking the gardens. You will assign your best physical therapists to him, not the interns. If he so much as gets a rash from a rough blanket, I will come back here, and we will have a very different kind of conversation. Do you understand my terms, Arthur?" Pendleton swallowed hard, looking at the dead, shark-like emptiness in Gabriel's eyes. "Yes. Yes, absolutely, Mr. Costa. But what should I tell his sister Miss Hayes handles his billing? She will notice the balance is 0. Gabriel finished writing the check. He tore it from the book and slid it across the desk. "You will tell her a private grant was approved. An anonymous donor. If you mention my name or describe me to her, I will buy this facility and turn it into a parking lot. Am I clear, dear?" "Crystal clear, sir." Gabriel stood up. He walked out of the facility, the air feeling a little lighter in his lungs. But he wasn't done. He got back into his SUV and dialed his head of security. "Elias," Gabriel said into the Bluetooth receiver. "Boss? Find out who owns the apartment building at 412 33rd Street in Queens, the one that was just sold 3 weeks ago. Find the new landlord." "Give me 5 minutes," Elias said. Gabriel drove back toward the city. When the phone rang, he answered immediately. Property was bought by a development group called Vertex Holdings, Elias reported. CEO is a guy named Richard Vance. Buys up cheap buildings, hikes the rent to force out lower-income tenants, then flips the units to yuppies. You want him touched. In Gabriel's world, touched meant a broken kneecap in a dark alley. It was tempting. It would be immensely satisfying to hear the man who put Nora in a freezing car scream. But Gabriel was a businessman. Violence was loud, paperwork was silent. No, Gabriel said. Call the family accountant. I want to buy Vertex Holdings. Hostile takeover. Tank their stock, buy the debt, do whatever you have to do. I want controlling interest by Friday. Boss, they're not exactly in our portfolio. Why do we want a mid-level real estate firm? Gabriel stared at the Manhattan skyline growing larger through his windshield. Because I want to fire Richard Vance, personally. When Gabriel returned to the office at 2:30 p.m., the building felt different. The air was charged. He walked past Nora's desk. She was typing rapidly, a small focused frown between her brows. She didn't look up as he passed. He went into his office and closed the door. He sat in his chair, feeling the residual adrenaline of a morning spent asserting dominance. He had fixed it. He had neutralized the threats. Nora was safe. Leo was safe. The ledger was balanced. But as the afternoon wore on, Gabriel realized something profoundly unsettling. He didn't want to just be her employer anymore. For 3 years he had watched her. He had admired her efficiency, her sharp wit, the way she could stare down a mob captain twice her size without blinking. But seeing her shivering in that car, seeing the sheer, unbreakable core of her devotion to her brother, it had shifted something tectonic inside him. The professional boundary they had maintained was no longer a wall. It was a cage. And Gabriel Costa didn't like cages. It took exactly 48 hours for the lie to unravel. Thursday evening, 6 p.m. The office was empty, the heavy silence of the 50th floor broken only by the hum of the HVAC system. Gabriel was reviewing a contract for a shipping union when his office doors flew open. Nora stood in the doorway. She wasn't holding a notepad. She wasn't carrying coffee. Her face was flushed, her chest heaving, as if she had just sprinted up all 50 flights of stairs. In her hand, she clutched a crumpled piece of paper. Gabriel slowly set his pen down. He knew exactly what this was. "Close the door, Nora," he said calmly. She stepped inside and kicked the heavy door shut behind her. The sound echoed like a gunshot. She marched across the room and slammed the crumpled paper onto his desk. "A private grant," she said, her voice shaking with a dangerous, barely suppressed rage. "An anonymous benefactor focused on traumatic brain injuries. That's what Arthur Pendleton told me on the phone 20 minutes ago." He sounded like he was reading a script with a gun to his head. Gabriel looked at the paper. It was a printed invoice from the Oakwood Care Facility. The balance was 0. "That's excellent news," Gabriel said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "You must be relieved." "Don't," Nora hissed, leaning over his desk, planting both hands flat on the leather blotter. She was inches from him now. He could smell her perfume, something subtle like vanilla and rain. "Do not play games with me, Gabriel. I know it was you. Pendleton was terrified. Who else terrifies people into taking $500,000? If you know the answer, why are you asking the question? Because I told you I didn't want your money." She yelled, the professional facade completely obliterated. Tears of absolute frustration sprang to her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "I told you I don't want to owe you. You just bought my brother's life for the next 10 years. You bought me. I am entirely, completely owned by a mob boss. She pushed off the desk, pacing wildly across the room, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair, ruining the chignon. Strands of blonde fell around her face. "How am I supposed to pay you back?" she demanded, spinning around to face him. "I can't. I will never make that kind of money. You just trapped me. You gave me an apartment I can't afford, and paid a medical bill I can't touch. What do you want from me, Gabriel? My loyalty. You already had it. My life, you have that too. What is the price for this?" Gabriel watched her panic. He watched the frantic, desperate math going on in her head, trying to calculate a debt that couldn't be quantified. He stood up. He walked around the desk. He didn't rush. He moved with the slow, deliberate intent of a predator cornering its prey, but there was no malice in his eyes, only a deep, heavy certainty. Nora backed up until her shoulders hit the acoustic wood paneling of the wall. She was trapped. Gabriel stopped just a foot away from her. The physical proximity was overwhelming. He was a head taller than her, broad and solid, radiating heat in the cool office. "Stop doing the math, Nora," he said, his voice a low, rough rumble. "I have to," she whispered, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Nothing is free, especially not in your world." Gabriel reached out. He didn't grab her shoulders this time. He raised his hand and gently, almost hesitantly, brushed a stray lock of blonde hair behind her ear. His knuckles grazed the soft skin of her cheek. Nora gasped quietly, her breath hitching at the unexpected tenderness of the touch. Her eyes widened, staring up into his dark, slate-colored gaze. "You're right," Gabriel said softly. "Nothing is free. But you're looking at the wrong ledger." He stepped closer, invading her space entirely. The scent of his expensive cologne sandalwood and something distinctly metallic like cold steel enveloped her. "When I saw you in that car," Gabriel continued, his thumb gently stroking her jawline, feeling the erratic hammering pulse at the base of her throat, "I realized that for 3 years I have trusted you with my empire. I have trusted you with my freedom. I have trusted you with my life, and I was too blind to see that you were breaking yourself to survive." Nora's lips parted, but no sound came out. The anger was evaporating, replaced by a terrifying, suffocating vulnerability. This wasn't charity. "Nora," he murmured, his face so close to hers that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "This was me taking care of what is mine. You protect me out there. You manage the chaos. Let me protect you. Let me manage this." "Gabriel." She breathed his name, slipping out as a plea. She didn't know if she was begging him to stop or begging him to hold her. "You don't owe me money," Gabriel said fiercely, his eyes locking onto hers, stripping away every lie, every defense they had ever built between them. "I don't want your debt. I don't want your gratitude." "Then what do you want?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Gabriel's hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, his large fingers tangling in the loose strands of her hair. He tilted her head up slightly. The air in the room was completely still. The silence roared in Nora's ears. "I want you to stop surviving," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a rough, raw whisper. "And I want you to let me be the reason you finally live." He didn't kiss her. He didn't need to. The promise in his words was heavier than any physical claim. He stood there holding her against the wall, absorbing the frantic beating of her heart, waiting for the woman who fought the whole world by herself to finally surrender her armor to him. Nora did not melt into him. She didn't collapse and she didn't weep. She was a woman who had spent 3 years holding her spine, rigid against a world trying to snap it. But as Gabriel's hand rested on the back of her neck, his thumb tracing the frantic pulse beneath her jaw, Something fundamental shifted in the quiet space between them. The frantic calculations in her head stopped. The crushing, suffocating ledger she had carried for over 1,000 days simply vanished. She looked up into Gabriel's dark slate eyes. She saw the absolute, terrifying sincerity there. He wasn't playing a game. He wasn't collecting a debt. He was claiming her yes, but he was also laying his own neck bare. Nora slowly raised her hand. Her fingers closed around his wrist. She didn't push him away. She just held on to him, anchoring herself to the only solid thing in a room that felt like it was spinning. "Okay," she whispered. The word was incredibly small, yet it echoed louder than a scream. "Okay." Gabriel closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, letting out a breath he seemed to have been holding since he found her in the garage. He rested his forehead against hers. They stood there in the silence of the 50th floor, two people who orchestrated chaos for a living, finding a singular moment of absolute stillness. 3 days later, the stillness was violently replaced by the brutal machinery of Costa Enterprises. It was 10 a.m. on a Friday. The boardroom was entirely encased in glass, hovering over the city like a predatory bird. Nora sat at the end of the long mahogany table. Her posture was flawless. Her notepad was open, her pen was poised. Opposite her sat Richard, the CEO of Vertex Holdings, the man who had bought her apartment building in Queens, the man who had doubled the rent and served the eviction notice that put her in a freezing car. Richard was sweating through his expensive, poorly tailored suit. He sat flanked by two nervous lawyers. They were supposed to be here for a standard real estate acquisition meeting. They thought they were selling a block of commercial properties to a shell company. They had no idea they were sitting in the viper's nest until Gabriel Costa walked into the room. Gabriel didn't wear a jacket. His dress shirt was crisp, his sleeves rolled up to the forearms, revealing the faint, faded ink of a life he had mostly left behind. He walked to the head of the table. He didn't sit. He picked up a thick, leather-bound folder that Nora had prepared that morning. "Mr. Costa," Richard stammered, standing up awkwardly. I was told I was meeting with the acquisitions director of Apollo Capital." "Apollo Capital is a subsidiary of Costa Enterprises," Gabriel said smoothly. He opened the folder. He didn't look at Richard. "Sit down." Richard sat, heavily. "At 9 a.m. this morning." Gabriel began his voice, a low rhythmic cadence that commanded the entire room. "Costa Enterprises finalized the purchase of 74% of Vertex Holdings' outstanding debt. We also leveraged a buyout of your 3 largest shareholders. As of 1 hour ago, I own 81% of your company." Richard's face drained of color. He looked at his lawyers. They stared at their own laptops, suddenly fascinated by their keyboards. In the corporate world, this was a slaughter. "I don't understand," Richard gasped, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbing his forehead. "Vertex is a mid-level residential firm. We don't have anything that aligns with your portfolio. Why the hostile takeover?" Gabriel finally looked at him. The slate eyes were entirely dead. It was the look of a man watching a bug struggle before stepping on it. "You manage properties in Queens," Gabriel said. "Specifically a building on 33rd Street. 3 weeks ago, you evicted 20 families to flip the units." Richard swallowed hard. "That's just business, Mr. Costa. The market dictates." "The market dictates what I tell it to dictate," Gabriel interrupted softly. The quietness of his voice made the lawyers flinch. "You displaced an employee of mine. You put her in a position of extreme vulnerability. In my world, that is an attack on my house." Richard's eyes darted around the room, landing wildly on Nora. She sat perfectly still at the end of the table. She didn't smile. She didn't glare. She just looked at him with the cold, detached efficiency of a woman watching garbage being collected. Gabriel slid a single piece of paper across the polished mahogany. It came to rest inches from Richard's trembling hands. "This is your resignation," Gabriel said. "You are forfeiting your severance package. You are stepping down as CEO. If you attempt to fight this in court, I will have my forensic accountants dismantle your life. I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. I know about the zoning bribes in Brooklyn. I will hand you to the federal prosecutors on a silver platter, and you will spend the next 20 years in a concrete box." Gabriel leaned over the table, placing his knuckles on the wood. "Sign the paper, Richard." Richard's hand shook so violently he could barely hold the pen his lawyer slid toward him. He scrawled his name on the line. He stood up, looking like a man who had just survived a car crash and stumbled out of the boardroom. The lawyers scurried out after him like frightened rats. The heavy glass door clicked shut. The room was silent. Gabriel stood at the head of the table. He picked up the signed resignation and looked at Nora. She set her pen down. The professional mask she wore so flawlessly slowly peeled away, revealing the stunned, awe-struck woman underneath. She had spent her entire adult life feeling powerless against men in suits who dictated the rules of her survival. Gabriel had just dismantled one with a single stroke of a pen. He hadn't broken a kneecap. He hadn't fired a gun. He had waged a corporate war exclusively for her. Gabriel walked slowly down the length of the table. He stopped next to her chair. He dropped the resignation paper onto her notepad. "Filing," Gabriel murmured. Nora looked at the signature. Then she looked up at him. A slow, genuine smile, sharp, dangerous, and incredibly beautiful, spread across her face. "I'll put it in the red folder," she said softly. Saturday morning broke with a pale, weak winter sun struggling through the grey New York clouds. Nora stood in the lobby of her new apartment building on 57th Street. She wore a thick cream sweater and dark jeans. She felt rested in a way that felt entirely foreign. Her bones didn't ache. The perpetual low-grade hum of panic that had lived in her chest for 3 years was completely gone. A black armored SUV pulled up to the curb. The tinted window rolled down. Gabriel was driving. She walked out into the brisk air, opened the passenger door and climbed in. The cabin was warm, smelling of leather and his sandalwood cologne. "You didn't have to drive me," Nora said, buckling her seatbelt. "I can take the train to Westchester." "I wanted to," Gabriel said simply. He put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. The drive to the Oakwood Care facility was mostly silent, but it wasn't the heavy, loaded silence of the past 3 years. It was comfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had finally stopped pretending. When they walked through the glass doors of the facility, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The receptionist practically vaulted out of her chair. Nurses in the hallway lowered their eyes, pressing themselves against the walls to give Gabriel a wide berth. Arthur Pendleton, the administrator, scurried out of his office, sweating profusely. "Mr. Costa, Miss Hayes, we weren't expecting you." Pendleton stammered, wringing his hands. "Everything is in order. The transfer went smoothly. Just point us to the room, Arthur," Gabriel said, his tone dismissing the man entirely. "Suite 410, East Wing, straight ahead." They walked down the wide, brightly lit corridor. The smell of bleach was still there, but it was fainter here, masked by the scent of expensive floral arrangements lining the halls. Nora stopped in front of the heavy oak door of Suite 410. Her hand hovered over the brass handle. She was trembling. She had spent the last 2 years visiting her brother in a cramped, windowless double-occupancy room that smelled of stale urine and despair. She didn't know what was on the other side of this door. Gabriel stepped back. He didn't touch her. He just stood behind her, a massive, silent shadow guarding her back. Nora pushed the door open. The suite was bathed in natural light. A massive bay window overlooked a meticulously landscaped private garden, the bare branches of the oak trees swaying in the wind. The walls were painted a soft, calming blue. There was a leather recliner for guests, a flat-screen television, and a stack of fresh, high-thread count blankets on a mahogany dresser. In the center of the room, in a state-of-the-art medical bed, lay Leo. He was 22, but his face held the permanent slack innocence of someone trapped between worlds. The feeding tube was neatly secured. He was clean. His hair was washed and brushed. The harsh fluorescent lighting of his old room was gone, replaced by the soft winter sun warming his pale skin. Sitting beside the bed was a private nurse in pristine scrubs, gently massaging Leo's atrophied hand to promote circulation. She stood up immediately as they entered. "Miss Hayes," the nurse said warmly. "I'm Sarah. I'm Leo's primary care specialist. He's been doing wonderfully today. His vitals are perfect." Nora couldn't speak. The knot in her throat was so large, so jagged, it felt like swallowing glass. She walked slowly toward the bed. She reached out her trembling fingers, gently brushing the hair back from her brother's forehead. Leo's eyes were open. They didn't track her perfectly, and they couldn't convey complex thought, but as Nora leaned over him, his breathing slowed. A tiny, almost imperceptible relaxing of his facial muscles occurred. He knew she was there. He felt safe. Nora's knees finally gave out. She sank into the chair beside the bed, burying her face in the thick blankets near Leo's hip. And she cried. It wasn't the desperate, agonizing sobbing Gabriel had heard through the apartment door on Tuesday night. This was a quiet, steady release. It was the tears of a soldier who had just been told the war was over. She held on to her brother's frail hand, pressing it against her cheek, crying for the years they had lost and the safety they had miraculously found. Gabriel did not enter the room. He stood in the hallway, leaning against the doorframe, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his dark overcoat. He watched the private nurse quietly excuse herself, slipping past him with a nervous nod. He watched the woman who practically ran his syndicate cry into a hospital blanket. Gabriel Costa had taken many lives. He had destroyed families, ruined businesses, and built an empire on the broken bones of his rivals. He knew exactly what he was. He was not a good man, but as he looked at Nora, watching the terrible, crushing weight finally lift from her shoulders, he realized this was the only genuinely good thing his money had ever done. 10 minutes later, Nora stood up. She wiped her eyes, kissed Leo's forehead, and walked out into the hallway. The door clicked softly shut behind her. She looked at Gabriel. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but the exhaustion was entirely gone. She looked radiant. She looked alive. "He has a window," Nora whispered, her voice cracking. "He can see the trees. I used to tell him about the trees outside our old apartment." "I made sure it faced south," Gabriel said quietly. "Better light in the afternoon." Nora took a step toward him. The space between them evaporated. She didn't hesitate. She reached up, grabbed the heavy wool lapels of his overcoat, and pulled him down to her. She kissed him. It was not gentle. It was desperate, grounded, and fiercely real. It was the collision of two people who understood the exact brutal cost of survival in a world designed to break them. Gabriel's massive hands immediately caught her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, his mouth answering hers with a possessive, territorial hunger. He tasted like espresso and danger. She tasted like tears and absolute relief. When they finally broke apart, breathing heavily in the quiet, sterile hallway, Gabriel kept his hands firmly on her hips. "You're mine," Gabriel murmured the words, a low, vibrating promise against her lips. It wasn't a question. It was a fact as solid and unmovable as concrete. Nora looked up at the man who ruled the city's shadows, the man who had bought her brother's life and burned down the company of the man who wronged her. She didn't feel trapped. She felt bulletproof. "I always was," she answered. The transition from secretary to the boss's undisputed partner didn't happen with a formal announcement. In Gabriel's world, power wasn't broadcast. It was demonstrated. 3 weeks passed. The biting chill of November bled into the freezing grey of December. Nora still sat at her desk on the 50th floor. She still managed the schedules, filtered the calls, and organized the ledgers. But the dynamic had fundamentally mutated. When the captains came in to report, they no longer looked past her. They looked at her. They saw the way Gabriel's eyes tracked her across a room. They noticed that she no longer took notes during the sensitive meetings she gave input. She was no longer just the gatekeeper. She was the gate itself. But absolute power always breeds resentment, and blind spots are fatal. It was a Tuesday evening just past 8 o'clock. Gabriel was locked in a brutal negotiation on the docks with a stubborn Irish crew. He had insisted Nora go home. Nora parked the company-issued sedan, a significant upgrade from the rusted Honda, in the secure underground lot of her apartment building. She stepped out, her heels clicking against the concrete, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. "Miss Hayes." Nora stopped. The voice came from the shadows near the elevator bank. 2 men stepped into the harsh fluorescent light. They wore cheap leather jackets and the unmistakable swagger of low-level muscle trying to punch above their weight class. Nora recognized the older one immediately. Sal. He was a soldier for Don Rossi, the Bronx capo, who had been furious about Gabriel's new tax on untaxed liquor shipments. Sal smiled. It was a greasy, unpleasant expression. "Mr. Rossi thought you and I should have a little chat. Seeing as you have Mr. Costa's ear these days. Maybe more than his ear from what we hear." Nora didn't panic. 3 weeks ago she might have. 3 weeks ago she was a desperate woman sleeping in a car, terrified of drawing attention. Today she was a woman who shared a bed with the devil himself. She slowly reached into her oversized leather tote bag. She didn't pull out mace. She didn't pull out a gun. Her hand found the small, heavy panic button Gabriel had explicitly instructed her to keep in her pocket at all times. She pressed it, feeling the silent double vibration confirm the signal had been sent directly to Elias Gabriel's head of security. Don Rossi is a regional distributor who barely hits his quarterly quotas. Sal. Nora said, her voice entirely flat. She didn't back away. She stood her ground, holding her bag perfectly still. If he has a grievance regarding the shipment taxes, he can submit a formal request for a sit-down. Cornering me in a parking garage is not a negotiation tactic. It's a suicide note. Sal laughed, looking at his partner. Listen to her. She reads a few ledgers and thinks she's a made man. He took a step closer, pulling a heavy black switchblade from his pocket. The blade flicked open with a sharp snick. Rossi wants the tax dropped. You're going to tell your boss that he's pushing too hard. Or maybe we mess up that pretty face, and Gabriel gets the message when you show up to work tomorrow, looking like a Picasso painting. Nora looked at the knife. Then she looked Sal dead in the eyes. Sal. Nora said, her tone almost conversational. Gabriel is currently at Pier 42. With Elias driving, it will take him exactly 9 minutes to get here. I pressed a silent alarm 3 minutes ago. Sal's grin faltered. His partner nervously glanced over his shoulder towards the garage entrance. You're lying, Sal sneered. I manage his schedule. I manage his security protocols. Do you honestly think Gabriel Costa lets the woman he sleeps with walk around this city unprotected? Nora tilted her head. The absolute chilling certainty in her voice made the 2 thugs freeze. You have 6 minutes left, Sal. When he arrives, he won't yell. He won't ask questions. He will draw his weapon, and he will put a hollow-point bullet through your kneecap. and then he will let Elias deal with the rest of you in a soundproof room. She checked her watch, a Cartier piece Gabriel had bought her last week. 5 minutes and 40 seconds, Nora corrected calmly. If I were you, I would run. And I would tell Don Rossi to enjoy early retirement, because by tomorrow morning, Gabriel is going to dismantle his entire operation in the Bronx. Sal stared at her. He saw no fear. He saw only a terrifying, clinical reflection of the man who ran the city. Nora wasn't a civilian caught in the crossfire. She was the collateral damage that had learned how to shoot back. The sound of tires screeching violently against concrete echoed down the ramp. A black SUV tore into the underground lot, taking the corner so fast the chassis groaned. It slammed on the brakes 50 feet away, the headlights blindingly bright, illuminating the two thugs like deer in the headlights. The driver's side door didn't even fully open before Gabriel was out of the vehicle. He moved with a terrifying, predatory speed. His overcoat flared out behind him. The heavy matte black handgun was already drawn and leveled perfectly at Sal's chest. The air in the garage seemed to instantly drop 10 degrees. Gabriel didn't shout a warning. He didn't ask them to drop the weapon. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Gabriel!" Nora's voice rang out sharp and authoritative, cutting through the heavy silence. "Stop!" Gabriel froze. The gun didn't waver a millimeter, but his eyes flicked to Nora. She was unharmed. Her posture was relaxed. "They were just leaving," Nora said, looking back at Sal. "Weren't you?" Sal dropped the knife. It clattered loudly against the concrete. He didn't say a word. He and his partner turned and ran toward the emergency stairwell, shoving each other in their panic to escape the absolute death standing 20 feet away. The heavy metal door banged shut behind them. Gabriel slowly lowered his weapon, engaging the safety. He didn't put it away. He walked over to Nora, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning her face, her neck, her hands looking for blood. "Did they touch you?" Gabriel demanded, his voice a gravelly, guttural rasp. "No." Gabriel reached out his free hand, gripping the back of her neck, pulling her forehead against his chest. He closed his eyes, his breathing slowly regulating as he felt the steady, calm rhythm of her pulse. He had broken every speed limit in Manhattan, a cold, blinding panic gripping his chest the moment the alert hit his phone. "I had it handled," Nora said softly, her voice muffled against his coat. Gabriel let out a short, dark laugh, stepping back to look at her. "I know you did. You terrified them more than the gun did. You told them I was coming." "I told them the exact time of your arrival." Nora corrected a faint, proud smile touching her lips. "I am still your secretary, Gabriel. I know your schedule." Gabriel looked at this incredible, unbreakable woman. The woman who had slept on concrete so her brother could live. The woman who stared down mob enforcers with a leather tote bag and a watch. He slipped the gun back into his shoulder holster. He didn't just love her. He revered her. "You're not my secretary, Nora," Gabriel said, taking her hand and lacing his fingers through hers. He looked toward the elevator bank, then back down at her. "You're my empire. Come upstairs. We have a Bronx crew to dismantle before morning." Nora squeezed his hand, the heavy silver rings on his fingers pressing into her skin. It was a violent, dangerous world. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't surviving it. She was ruling it. "Let's go," she said. They walked toward the elevator together, leaving the dropped knife on the cold concrete behind them. Two shadows perfectly aligned, stepping into the light. That is how you turn a corporate liability into the queen of the underworld. Gabriel thought he was saving Nora, but in the end, she became the iron spine of his entire empire. Did you love this grounded, intense take on the mafia boss and the secretary? If you want more stories where the heroine fights, just as hard as the ruthless men trying to protect her, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with a friend who loves a slow burn romance with high stakes. Let me know in the comments, what was your favorite moment of Nora standing her ground? See you in the next one.